Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Master of Orion at Astra from Orion Studio. Master of Orion at Astra is a 2-to-4 player 4X game based on the Master of Orion video game franchise. This here is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, and speaking of which, that 2-to-4 player, I think that's base game only. Like, I do believe there are plans for a higher player count with expansions, but don't quote me on that. Check out the campaign page down below. Speaking of which, I'll have a link to the campaign page down below. But with that said, this is a 2-to-4 player 4X game that plays in roughly, I don't always do player time in this, but I think that it's very relevant when you're talking about a 4X game. It plays in roughly an hour per player, although it does depend on the game length because there's a 6-round game and an 8-round game. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's dive into what this is. This is a 4X game. I will not be diving into every single little rule. There's a lot going on as far as the minutiae, but I can give you a very good overview, or at least I think a good overview, by just jumping into the how you win, what the turn structure looks like, and then just giving you the generals from there. To that end, how do you win? You win by getting the most points in the game. Now, game end is going to trigger in one of 4 ways. Either at the end of 6 or 8 rounds, depending if you're playing a short or a long game, or alternatively if a player holds onto the Orion system, which when you're exploring through this galaxy over here, the Orion system is going to be the last system you discover, and if a player holds on to that, that can trigger endgame. Or if a player builds their UDP over here, if they build that and then hold on to that for a round, and then lastly, if you take control of a player's system and hold on to that. So those are the 3 additional endgame triggers in addition to the 6 or 8 rounds of play. But for simplicity's sake, if you just wanted to get a general idea of how to play, just think of it as a 6 or 8 round game with some ways that the game can end early. As far as when you're adding up points at the end of it, you're going to go ahead and look at your player A's, which tell you all the various points you can get. Each system is worth between 1 to 5 points. You'll get a point for every 4 population in your empire. Every system is going to have population you start the game with and can grow it. You're going to get points for every technology branch you upgraded to tier 5. You're going to have 4 branches of technology, and you can upgrade them all the way to tier 5, and you get a point as shown over here. You get a point for every empire token you have at the end of the game. You can get those by earning public missions. There's going to be public and secret missions that you have access to, the public or secret part of a mission, and you get points for those. You get points for every other player's system under your influence, which is a concept we probably won't get heavily into this, but there's diplomacy in the game, and there's ways to have your own system under your influence and other systems under your influence. You get points by completing your secret missions and finding anomaly cards or owning specific buildings, and then you can lose points equal to your unrest level. Unrest is a system in the game where you can go ahead and increase your unrest for a variety of things, including getting extra resources, but there is a cost to doing so in terms of lost resources from through unrest, as well as the end game points you'll lose at the end of the game. So that's kind of what you're trying to do as far as the game length and as far as how you're gaining points. And again, you don't need to know every single detail, you need to remember every single part of that, but the general idea is that's your point track. That's the things you're trying to do in this game. Which brings us to, what does your actual round look like? What does a turn look like in the game? Well, the game is going to be driven by these action cards. You're going to have your own custom empire card, which is a big deal over here. So for example, right now I have the Silence and the Kraken set up, and the Silence have their own custom empire card with their own special ability that nobody else has access to, and all of these cards are exceedingly fun to play through. All of the empires that have their own little card, each one is, the empires are highly asymmetric in terms of their player boards and the difference in the technologies they have, but also in terms of this card over here alone is going to be a big factor in feeling different and giving you something special you can do that breaks the rules of the game, and they all feel cool. They all feel cool is what it comes down to. But you're going to have these cards over here, and on your turn you're going to play a card, and you can also do some free actions as well to boost your actions, to do things like triggering that unrest to get resources. So there's free actions you can do every turn, but the main action you're doing is you're playing a card. You're going to play a card over here, which can be your empire card with a special ability, or it can be one of these default cards that give you basic actions: flight, attack, invasion, and exploration, growth, research, construction, and diplomacy, and these will be the basic actions you're taking every single turn. So you play a card, you do one of the actions on the card, that's your turn. But you also have other cards you're going to get, and you're going to get them through drafting, which is my favorite game mechanic, because you have this giant technology deck over here, which players are going to be drawing 5 cards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then drafting 3 cards and discarding the last 2. So I'm going to look at these cards over here and say, oh, we got a ion drive, a nuclear missile, a crust prospecting, gauze canyons, and advanced encryption, and these represent technologies that I can possibly build in the game if I have the required tech tree level. So for example, if I want nuclear missiles, which is very cool, those will help me, spend dice to be able to roll more dice over here. So that nuclear missile over here but I have to go ahead and upgrade my biology and chemistry up by 1 in order to benefit from this card as a development. So I can play this card as a development and I have a new technology in front of me. Or you can use a card for their actions. Cards have actions on them in the top right corner, and so you can use a card either for its actions, which again will be one of those 8 basic actions in the game, or alternatively being added to your tableau to have more technologies and to benefit from the technologies, the things you can do that break the game, assuming you have the requisite tech tree advances to be able to play those. So you're going to look at your 5 cards, you're going to think about which one you want and which ones you want to pass to your opponents, and then choose one, put it in your hand, pass the rest, get the new cards from the player until you have 3 cards, which means on a typical turn, you'll have the 3 cards you drafted, your 4 cards that your 4 basic cards, and then your special empire card. Now you can hold on cards round to round, so you sometimes can have more. There's a limit of 10 cards, but that's the basic idea as far as how you're building your hand and your possible actions. That's going to end with you having a bunch of actions. I'm just going to draw 3 actions right now just to be able to show you this. So I got my actions, I have my 3, I specifically chose those. Look, I got nuclear missile again. We're going to choose those actions, and now on my turn, now that I have this hand of 8 cards to start with, I'm going to pick an action and play that action. This is where I'm going to walk you through the basic actions, but again, well, we'll come back to these cards later. Let's walk you through some basic actions over here. The basic actions, I'm going to just give you a quick overview of how these actions work, and a good concept to know that I'm not going to go into the specifics within each one, but a good concept is you can always pay credits to boost how powerful an action is. I'll give you 1 or 2 examples as we go through so you can get a sense, but in general, whatever you're doing in the game, you can do more of it if you pay credits to let you do more of it. But with that said, let's go through the basic actions. We have flight. Flight's going to let you move around the galaxy. The galaxy is connected by these little tokens over here, by these little connection points over here that make these areas connected. So for example, right now, and each tile is its own spot effectively. So moving from here to here, well, I can't move from here to there, I can move from here to here through this linked connection point over here. Once you upgrade your drives over here, so once you upgrade to a jump drive, you can now jump across even when there's only half a connection point, and when you upgrade to advanced jump drive, you can jump across even when there's no connection point. So for example, you can go from here to here only if you have an advanced jump drive because there's no connection point at all. Versus you can go from here to here at any point, and you can go from here to here if you have your jump drives in general. That's the general idea of movement. Your ships can move up to their speed, which different ships will have different speeds, and that's going to be the main way you're going to be exploring the galaxy. Although you do need to stop when you hit an unexplored galaxy, and then go ahead and draw planet tiles from the matching planet type, placing them onto the board, and then drawing a discovery tile as well, and placing that onto the board. And that combination of a planet tile and discovery kind of gives you the unique situation as far as what's going on in that system. That's the basics of the move action, and in general, paying currency will let you move more ships. Paying credits will let you move more ships. Attacking is exactly what it sounds like. This is how you engage in combat. You take this action, and then you go ahead and jump into either a neutral player, or a space pirates, a space eel, something like that, or alternatively attacking your opponents in the game by jumping into combat using the attack action. We'll talk a bit more about how attack resolves later, but let's actually just talk about how attack resolves. The general idea of how attack resolves is you're going to be adding up the strength of your various ships, rolling that many dice, and then assigning those rolled values to various actions. So for example, you start the game with a laser cannon, so I can go ahead and assign this 4 to go ahead and deal 1 damage by laser cannon. That's a one-time use ability, as opposed to your combat action over here, you can assign as many 6s as you want to deal 1 damage. So 6s are always going to be hit with the Silent Contra. The Clack and Hive, on the other hand, they can turn 5s into hits on a regular basis. They're a little bit more combat driven, so they have more general actions there. But as you build more technologies, you have the opportunity to go ahead and assign dice in more ways. So you start off with that basic, but you can assign dice more so the more stuff you build in the game. That's the general idea of how combat works. There's things with shield, there's rolls, there's rerolls, all these other things, but that's the general idea. It's a dice-driven system with the strength of your ships, and then assigning those dice to various abilities to carry out its effects. There's retreating, there's all these other things, but that's the basics of combat. We have invasion. Invasion is how you invade someone else's homeworld. You can go ahead and invade somebody's homeworld, either their home planet itself, or alternatively a planet they've discovered and started to build out, and you can go ahead and take control there, again, utilizing a dice-driven system and assigning those dice to various cards or invasion abilities. Exploration. Exploration will basically let you gather anomaly tokens from the board. Now, there's not any right now, but as you place various discovery tiles out, some of these discovery tiles will have anomaly symbols on them. So let's drop this over here. Let's pretend we've explored this galaxy. We have a new planet token out. We're going to go ahead and have these anomaly tokens. So whenever you have the anomaly tokens over here, you can go ahead and use ships located in that system to gather the anomaly tokens and draw cards from this anomaly deck over here. So these deck will be full of all these cards that let you do things like, doing what's it called, an action over here. You can construct a Titan. Do a construction action. You can construct a Titan for 3 cheaper with that Space Hulk. So you can have all these anomaly cards, which are basic instant use abilities that you can benefit from, and we'll come back to those a bit later. But that's the basic idea of the exploration action. You're taking advantage of the anomaly tokens that have popped up on the various discovery tiles to draw cards and use those cards. Over here we have on the next actions, we have growth. Growth is going to be how you grow your population. And again, this is another thing where you can pay credits to grow more population, but you do have to pay food to do so. You start with these dice over here that go up to 4 that track your population value in scientists, in food, in farmers, and in construction. Those are going to be the 3 basic tiers you're working with: getting more science to get new science cards, getting more food to get more population, and getting more workers to get more construction to build various buildings and ships and orbitals, the space bases, all of those things. And you can increase your population by paying food, but you can increase more of it by also paying credits to impact more population dice. Although, well, I don't want to bog down too much into it. But that's the basic idea of the population action. Research is going to let you go ahead and upgrade those tech trees. You're going to have to pay science listed on the tech tree on the side, so 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, depending on the level. And you can increase 1 tech tree, or if you pay those credits, you can increase multiple tech trees as well, but you still have to pay that research cost. But it is a quick way to ramp up and benefit from some of these technologies, because the research tracks, they give you a built-in technology at each tier, but they also give you the ability to play those cards, those development cards, so you're kind of getting two ways of growing whenever you increase your research. This is also worth noting that generally each faction has unique asymmetry as far as different areas. So for example, our hydroponic farm is the default level 1 action, level 1 research in biology and chemistry. But if you're playing as a Silent Quantas, you instead have abduction, which is an invasion-based action instead. So you can have 4 different customizations across your specific races over here that are different depending on the faction you're playing as in those research trees. Construction is going to be how you build buildings, because there are going to be these buildings that go out onto the board to increase your they go specifically onto the building spots. They're going to go ahead and give you benefits. You have to unlock access to those by going ahead and researching, and you'll see all of those listed on your player aid. You'll have a full breakdown of what they do, what they cost, all of those things, and the tons of different little building icons you'll have as you build out your bases. But you can also build spaceships or orbitals or doomstars, all the various things that you're going to be building in the game. That's what you do in the construction action. And then diplomacy. Diplomacy is going to be possibly the most complicated action. There's a full section of your player aid over here that's going to cover all the possible diplomacy effects, but basically you have this resource you're going to be spending. You're going to be rolling dice equal to that, and then assigning those dice to take various actions, from reducing unrest, increasing your opponent's unrest, taking influence over various sectors, a whole bunch of things you can do with diplomacy, a whole section of like 8 different actions you can do with your diplomacy actions. Those are the 8 basic actions you're doing in the game, which means, again, to give you a general overview of the gameplay, the general overview is you're trying to get points in the game before the game ends. Game will end after 6 or 8 rounds, or when one of the early endgame triggers can happen. Your turn sequence is going to be drafting cards that give you technology cards that are going to your hand, and then playing those technology cards as well as your default action cards in order to choose the various actions you're going to be taking across each round from those 8 core actions that effectively involve moving across the galaxy, engaging in combat, building out your science track, building new items, as well as the various other 4 stuff you're going to be doing in order to hopefully expand your empire better and more efficiently than your opponents. There's a lot of other things going on here, but that is a general overview of how Masters of Orion Ad Astra plays. Which means it's kind of a good time to dive into our review here, because we will touch up on a few other things as I go into things I liked, didn't like, and can see others not liking. Because as I touch upon certain points, we'll get into a few more stuff, but this is hopefully enough of a foundation for you. So, let's talk about what I like, don't like, can see others not liking about the game. Starting off with what I like, which the biggest thing is going to be drafting offhand. Drafting, to me, can be a double-edged sword. I love drafting as a mechanic, but I do find that if the drafting itself is intense enough, then I don't enjoy it. I don't find it to be fun if you're not having those anxiety-ridden moments of what do I need to do. And you definitely have that as you're playing. You're going to be handed a hand of technology cards, and granted at the beginning of the game, sometimes you can't even benefit from some of those developments, and so sometimes it's more about the actions, and those are a little freer. But whenever you can benefit from developments, you're going to be choosing between not just what's good for you, but what you're handing to your opponent, and so getting that handful of goodies from this giant technology deck over here is incredibly satisfying. Every time I get into another round, there's like 5 new treasure chests of items being handed to me that I have to pick and choose which ones get added, and so I enjoy that very much. The action card and development card sequence, the fact that you're dealing with these action cards over here, that again, they're defining both the actions you can take or alternatively the development that you have, that's a fun little decision as far as what am I going to benefit from more? Am I benefiting from this technology? Am I having some new military weapon or defense that's going to help me in the game? Or am I trying to instead build up my, I don't know, anything else? Or do I just want that action? Is it going to help me more to just get one more population in play to be able to build up my engine for the next round a little better? Those decisions are going to be incredibly present, and so I like that system. It's quick, it's easy to teach, it's clean, and it forces you to constantly decide what it is you want to do. And we haven't even gotten to the part, which we're going to, I guess, loosely touch upon here and there, but the nods to the video game franchise. I'm a huge fan of Master of Orion, the video game, specifically 2. That's the one I played the most. I think I dove into 3 at one point. Wasn't as much for me, but 2, I've spent hundreds of hours playing through Master of Orion 2, the Battle for Antares, I think it's called. I think that's what it's called. But it's an enjoyable system. It's an enjoyable game, and there's many nods to that. I think they did a good job as far as adapting the video game IP, having enough nods to the video game IP that for someone like myself who's a fan of it, I'm like, ooh, I'm playing as the Silence over here, and they got all the science and the extra stuff over there. We have taken advantage of Orion over here. We have the 3 different types of workers you're trying to balance, the being mindful of unrest, the different planetary systems and your advantages or disadvantages around it, the hydroponic farms, I mean, that's a technology you get in the game and you get it in the board game. So small stupid nods like that to someone like myself who's a fan of the video game franchise are definitely present, while at the same time it doesn't tie itself down to the video game franchise. It doesn't like limit itself. This feels like a good 4X board game that gives tribute to the video game and does it justice, but without tying it down in a way that limits what the board game is doing. So I think they did a good job in the adaptation aspect. The multiple endgame conditions is a nice aspect. It forces you to be mindful of what's going on in the game, and you can't purely rely on those 6 to 8 rounds. So you have that additional aspect you're trying to watch for as you go. The variable game length, that's 6 or 8 rounds, especially for someone like myself that tends to be a little shy when games hit that, past 3-hour range. The ability to knock out a game in 2 hours, even less than that. And if you're playing a 2-player game of this, even though it's officially an hour per player, you can get it done in much less than 2 hours once you know what's going on. And even at a full 4-player count, I don't think the 6-round game is the 3 hours that would be. 4-player count would be 4 hours officially. I don't think it's that long. I think it's even coming in a little less than what they're advertising, at least once you know what you're doing. And so that's good to have that 6-round option. And if you want that slightly longer game, you do have that 8-round flexibility. So I like having that flexibility around the game system to adapt what myself and my friends are currently doing at that moment. There's a fun little aspect in the game where it's not too punishing in a variety of ways. First of all, combat itself in general is not too punishing. There's plenty of defensive options, there's retreating options, but even when you die, there's the option to convert your ships back to scrap. You have this scrap value on your ships, although sometimes you have to unlock them at higher levels, and getting your resources back to be able to recycle into other things, again, makes dying and losing in combat not even as punishing as all that, which is a nice aspect. That's kind of what I mentioned when I said this game it's approachable, it's accessible, it gives you that 4X aspect, but it's not too punishing while you go through it. The map connections over here are interesting. I'm going to come back to it in the things I don't like either, but the map connections over here are an interesting system, both in terms of the way different systems link together. Like, a tile is not inherently adjacent to another tile. There's ways you're jumping through the galaxy, and those ways free up as you improve your jump drives over here to your advanced jump drives. So that's an interesting situation that is different and unique and does force you to examine the galaxy around you. There is a negative downside to it, but for right now, I think overall it is a good system that I do like. The boosting actions. Boosting actions is so restricting because you need credits in the game. You need your credits, you need your income, and so at first when you learn the game, you're like, oh, well, of course I'll boost this and I'll boost that because I want my technology tracks, I want more population. It's an easy decision that I'm going to boost more things. until you realize you are restricted on how much money you actually have to boost the things you want. And so you really have to choose where your extra actions are going to come from. What is it you're actually going to prioritize when you boost an action in the game? And so the concept, as well as the limitations around the concept, again, force me as a player to try to decide what makes the most sense and what I'm ultimately going to do. Similarly, the unrest aspect, being able to push your unrest in order to get extra resources you might need, but paying the cost for it later, that's another thing that, again, I like that decision point. I like that aspect of, is it worth pushing my people a little harder? Thematically, not necessarily great, but pragmatically, it could be great as far as pushing people a little harder, but then paying the cost later. And so overall, there's a lot of things that are just going on here that work to make this game accessible, fun, asymmetric, a handful of goodies I cannot get over, these technology cards, the system and play. It's just a great way of early on you are being handed a whole lot of stuff in the game. Like if you've played any games with technology trees, you have your limited technology tree here, but then you also have a giant deck full of things that are fun to get, but you can't even get them right away, and that forces you, drives you to start moving up your tracks as soon as possible. As far as things I don't like in the game, I'll start with that one that I touched upon already, that map connection aspect, because the map connection I think is a good system, but it also can be a little visually tough to figure out what's adjacent to each other at a glance. So in this game, and you will learn it pretty quickly, again, as you go through a 2-3 hour long game, you'll puzzle with it for the first, half an hour as you're like, okay, well that was connected to that isn't there, but it's not an obvious thing to be like, well, this is connected to these two, which is connected to those three, which is connected to those two, connected to that. You don't have that simplicity in the game because of the way these symbols work. So you can have weird situations where none of these are connected to this. To get to this tile, you have to kind of puzzle your way through these, head around over here, and get to there. To get to here from here, you have to go to here, then to here, then to here. And again, it's not the hardest to see, but it's the kind of thing that if you're not paying enough attention, it can throw off your plans pretty easily. So it's not a big complaint. It's one of those things that you pick it up pretty quickly, but it can result in players thinking, I've had this happen, where someone thought they can go somewhere and they couldn't, and then they realized when they were taking their turns, either because they forgot about the rule in general or just the visual aspects to it. I'll say more importantly, there are a lot of prototype issues with the game, and this is tricky because this is the nature of reviewing a prototype. This is a prototype, all rules and components have to change, but there's a whole lot of things that fall in the category of potentially just a prototype issue, and some of them for sure, some of them I can't be so sure. Starting off with the fact that the rulebook was definitely a mess. It was not my favorite rulebook to read through. It was basically a very, very long Google Doc that had a lot of issues in it and a lot of lack of clarity in it, and so I struggled with the rulebook on this one, but again, hopefully that is just a prototype issue and something you won't have to face in your final game. That said, I still call these things out when I experience them, because if it's not changed in the final game, this is the experience I had. It's worth you knowing. Again, I am confident it'll be better, I just can't speak to how much better. Potential balance issues are definitely a factor. As much as I say all the factions are fun to, or at least all the factions I've played as are fun to play with, and I mean even the ones I haven't played as, looked at their abilities and it's fun to play against or even just see what they can do. There's a lot of asymmetry and incredible power. These Klakens over here can basically destroy their population, their unique card over here, the Klaken Hive. They basically can destroy their own population and turn it into resources, which means you can just build your population and then destroy them, convert them into resources. A fascinating little puzzle. These Silence over here, their card lets you basically build technologies you can't otherwise build. You can go above your technology level, which unlocks potential capabilities that no one else has access to. That's incredibly game-breaking and also thematic to the video game. So I think that's fun. So in general, there's a lot of fun things going on with the factions that I really enjoy and appreciate, but that comes at the potential downside of, are they balanced? I don't know about that aspect, although I do know that there are areas that specifically are not balanced. So in these cards over here, this anomaly deck over here, the difference in the power of these anomaly cards that players are randomly picking up, it seems pretty high. There's cards that will give you 2 science, which granted science is fun, but then there'll be a card that gives you an endgame victory point over here. The light phenomenon over here gives you an endgame victory point, which is great because that's cool. But also victory points are so hard to get that seems so much more powerful than the 2 science. And even if you want to sit there and debate, well, if you get the 2 science early enough in the game, it could be better because you can turn into X, Y, and Z. The most powerful card in this deck is easily the mystery box. You simply get 2 anomaly cards. So one person in the game, because only one of these, I'm pretty sure it's only one of these, one person in the game who draws this card is getting 2 cards on their turn. For all you know, that could be 2 points. And that is inherently, like, just the sheer luck of the draw, they're getting a much better system over there, a much better return, because if I draw 1 card and I get 2 cards, that's crazy. I mean, it's not that crazy, but it's crazy. It's not a balance thing. So in terms of if balance is your main concern over here, I know that there are areas I definitely think aren't balanced, and then there are areas I'm not sure about. Or even things like starting off. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this part, but I think I'm getting it right. You can kind of divvy up your resources and populations to whatever configuration you want. And from what I can see, I kind of think you should just, and there might be exceptions depending on your racial powers and all that, but I kind of think you should always just start with 3 on one single population because of the way the population increases cost. So you kind of have this option of how you want to distribute your population, but usually, and again, there's potential arguments you can make as far as the actions you're going to take, but I think it's more efficient to start with the 3 and then work your way towards the others, because as you increase your population, it has an increasing cost to it. So building 2 ones is far cheaper. So again, there's small things like that where there's either obvious decisions or potential balance issues or whatever that hopefully are just prototype issues, but I can't say for sure. There's also component issues, some which I'm sure will be cleared up. The prototype copy I have, the red and orange ships are so identical that I have made the mistake multiple times of which one is which, even when I know that they're so identical. The red and orange are basically the same color. I assume that will be cleaned up. I have to assume they are very much the same color, but then there's things that I'm not so sure about how they'll handle. So for example, buildings, the difference between this building over here and this building over here, that's pretty obvious. So you can do that. You have to look at your player rate to see what they are, sure, but that's pretty obvious. But then at a glance, seeing the difference between those 2 buildings is significantly harder. These 2 generally have the same outline and shape, and you'll have a harder time seeing those at a glance. So, and they have a lot of buildings. So I don't know what the plan is as far as what's the best way to make them stand out as obviously as possible without having to constantly reference your sheet each time. I don't know what the solution is, but that's kind of small little things that get a little bit in the way of the experience, some worse than others. All of them fall under that prototype umbrella, which means I believe some, many, or all of these will be improved or addressed, but I can't say for sure, so I have to call them out along the way. Last thing I'll cover, and the things I don't like, the diplomat action in general, the entire diplomat lineup of actions, as well as the way diplomat cards are exchanged. I like this system and I don't want them to get rid of it, but I felt that was the most convoluted or cluttered from everything else in the game. And to me, everything else in the game made sense and was easy to teach and play with, versus the thing that had the most rules referencing and the least easily understood and absorbed by players was definitely things around the diplomat actions. Again, it's a hard thing to critique because I like the system in the game. Again, both a nod to the video game as well as just what they add to the gameplay. I think it's a good element to the gameplay, but it was by far the one that was the most finicky to manage, teach, and play with and address. As far as things I can see others not liking, first of all, there's potential balance issues, and I know I covered this already, but the difference is some things will actually bother me, and some things not so much. So for example, when I mentioned the race factions being balanced, as long as I can't obviously tell that someone's overpowered, I don't care if the Silent have a slightly higher win rate than the Kraken, as long as it's not, oh my gosh, the Silent are ridiculously overpowered. But you might, especially if you're like a hardcore 4X player and you take this as a very serious experience, the level of balance issues is going to matter more for you than it might for me. So that's why I kind of have it in both sections. The 2-player game is okay, but not as good. Diplomacy, again, is going to be the biggest thing that suffers in a 2-player game. The nature of the way diplomacy cards are exchanged just makes it so much less rewarding for a 2-player experience. They're present, just not nearly the same, and in general the fight over the galaxy is going to be a little less engaging. I do still think it was fun, but I definitely think the 3-player game is 3 and 4-player game is significantly better than a 2-player game is. So I think 2-player is fun, it's good, but it definitely lacks from the game experience, although it is quicker, so there is that upside. The anomaly cards, we talked about the anomaly cards already, we talked about that. Adaptations. Adaptations over here are this concept in the game where as you're taking a control of various planets over here, there's basically a level of unrest they'll add to your unrest pool. But for example, Tropical is a high gravity planet, and on high gravity planets, the Silents actually add even more unrest in the game, versus low gravity planets, they add less unrest. And that type of adaptation on these various characters is a fun little, again, it's a nice little element that makes them more asymmetrical, and I think it's a cute little system and a cute little concept, and I like the way it's implemented, but I do find that that type of thing works better in the video game. In the board game, the size of the actual galaxy and the ability to get around to all these different places, to me, it kind of feels in the board game, it more feels a bit like luck and well, lack of luck or lucky or unlucky as far as what you draw. And it's worth noting when you visit a system for the first time, you do get to choose 2 planets and place 1 down, which does mean, especially if you're eyeing the other players and you're paying enough attention, there is an element of placing something down that's better for you and not for them. So there's an advantage to even just exploring the galaxy, even if you're not the first one to populate it. But again, as far as the actual decisions you're making when you populate things, because it's smaller, I felt it was a good system. I still like it, but it kind of goes back to that balance thing. I'm not confident how balanced it is. I still liked it within the game, but I feel that you almost need a large galaxy for the full gameplay element of that to shine. As far as final thoughts on Master of Orion at Astra, I'm not a huge 4X player, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. Meaning there's Twilight Imperium players, there's, Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy players, there's people who love the 4X genre and get heavily invested in it. For me, I have tended to appreciate the lighter side of the 4X genre. When you're dealing with these large, epic, galaxy-sprawling games where you're taking people down and all that stuff, there's games that I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed a lot of games in the system, but I tend to appreciate the ones that are 3 hours or less and not 4 hours or more. I tend to appreciate the ones that are a little more casual, even if it's sacrifices balance, as opposed to a heavily optimized experience. And so understand that bias, not bias, but gameplay preference, I guess, that I have as we go into this. But overall, I enjoyed this one. The nostalgia factor certainly doesn't hurt, but I also think the game stands on its own. There's some things that I hope Arkan does clean up a little bit, those prototype issues, and I think those things can make it a better, more streamlined experience, and that rulebook certainly can be better as well. But overall, the game teaches pretty quickly, it plays pretty decently, most elements of the game are intuitive, and yet as a whole package, definitely unique on its own. Again, all the things work well. If you've played games, most of the elements do come across pretty decently, but the way Arkan combine this all together works out as a very enjoyable, very accessible 4X game that I overall enjoyed. It's a 4 out of 5 for me. I do wonder where the final rating will go, meaning, again, this is a prototype element and definitely has that restriction. I don't know if it will grow or not, or if it'll stay the same. I have a hard time believing it would be worse than a 4 out of 5 because it's a good game. I had fun with it, but I do wonder if that can go higher too if things are cleaned up or improved upon in the final version. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you want something on the quicker side, I definitely recommend Last Light. I think it's a fun, fast-paced 4X game that plays in an hour. If you want something in the same gameplay length, check out Eclipse. I've only played the original Eclipse, not Second Dawn for the Galaxy, but by all accounts, that seems to be the better game. And then lastly, obviously, there's Twilight Imperium, which I rarely give recommendations of games I haven't played, but if you're talking about 4X, I think you'd be hard-pressed not to mention one of the highest ranked games on Board Game Geek, although that applies to Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy as well. In any case, until next time, I am Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.